Okay, well, good morning and welcome everyone to What's Up Wednesday, Civic Literacy and Citizenship, Cultivating Space for Communities to Co-Create Knowledge and Make Change. My name is George Bergstrom, and I'm the Southwest Regional Coordinator for the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office. I'll be the host and question moderator today, and I'm just going to start off listing the names of our presenters. I'm going to let them do a more full introduction. So with us this morning are Ilana Stonebreaker at IU's SPIA School of Business Library, Melissa Weber and Vanessa Pacheco at Purdue University's Center for Civic Engagement. I hope I got that right, and it looks like their slides are up. As a reminder to everyone, this is recording, and so if you have individual sound issues, you'll be able to grab the recording afterwards. If there is a global sound issue, we will announce that in the sound issues box in the lower left-hand corner. As we go through today's webinar, if you want to put your questions in the chat box right above that sound issue box, I will be kind of noting those down and getting them to the presenters near the end. So I'd like to welcome all of you and welcome our presenters one last time. And I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to them. Thank you very much.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Mel Gruber, or like I like to say, Melissa for long. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm going to get us started. And I'm so excited to be here with Ilana Stonebreaker, who right now works at Indiana University. When we met, she was working with us at Purdue University, so we miss her so much, as well as my colleague Vanessa Pacheco. Both use she, her pronouns. And Vanessa is my colleague in civic engagement leadership development at Purdue. And first of all, before we talk about civic literacy and citizenship and the work that we were up to together, creating space for our communities to co-create knowledge and to make change in our communities, let's talk a little bit about the flow of our time together. So we're going to talk a little bit about civic literacy, what it is, how it's related to libraries, citizenship, what it means, the Citizens Academy, which is how these things culminated in a real life activity for us, and our success stories related to the Citizens Academy course that we created. So the definition of civic literacy that we're using today to ground our work is that civic literacy is the knowledge and skills you need to participate in making change in your community. And we think about communities both geographically, which is what I think most people think about when they think about communities, but also there's lots of different communities that we belong to. So for me, I'm a woman, so I identify in a community of women. And what are the knowledge and skills I need to create change in the communities, maybe my residence hall if I'm a student. Maybe my student organization or my community civic group, right? And then we think about those communities as a live text that we can read, so to speak, through civic literacy. So civic literacy is the knowledge and skills that we use in order to be able to read our communities, but also to be able to edit that live text and think of that text as like a rough draft that we can also contribute to create change.
And so this specifically is looking at a partnership between a civic education office and the libraries, in this case Purdue Libraries. But I want to kind of step back and talk a little bit about why libraries are excellent partners for teaching civic literacy, using this text of the community, right? And why libraries are this excellent partner and should be kind of teaching civic literacy. So one of the things I always like to kind of make people aware with is this chart. It is from Pew Internet Study. And so what it's looking at is local community attachment, so how much people identify with their local community, and regular voting, and things that it's connected to. And some of the things that it is connected to is the consumption of knowledge, right? So people who regularly use 3+ sources for community news, or who look at local media, who consume local media, who follow and kind of look at these local sources tend to be more community focused and have more regular voting habits, right? So basically there's a connection between the information we consume and the sort of civic engagement that we pursue, right? And that has huge effects for what local news is, because as you guys all know, local news is specifically something that affects local areas, and there are so many local governments to sort of become involved in, right? So we're right before the election. You might be filling out your ballot right now, or have just, so you might have looked at some of these different levels. And so when we talk about local government, which is the focus of this engagement, we also should talk about local government. So there's one federal government in the United States. There are 50 states, right? But then there are 3,034 counties, right? So that's over 3,000, let's just say, county health departments, right? Affects us a lot in COVID, right? That's 19,429 municipalities. So that could be 19,425 local police departments, right? There are 13,000 school districts. So in Indiana, we voted on school board this year. So those are all different pieces of the kind of puzzle of thinking through what civic engagement means and how it might relate to local government. So why should librarians teach or engage in local on civic engagement and local government? Well, one is that when you start talking to a group of librarians, you find that we're very well connected, right? We know, as I sort of talk about how could you connect with your local government, you may think of different departments either inside of your libraries or that you work with, right, that you could connect with people who are interested in those, right? So whether that's connections inside of a local government area or to local nonprofits, et cetera. In addition, public libraries specifically are dependent upon an educated citizenry that understands the value and importance of local government. And because information consumption is so important to local community attachment, information is very key to solving any problem, but specifically the problems we focus on in this course specifically. So at a larger level, when you look at how to teach these different things, kind of related to what Mel was talking about in terms of what civic literacy looks like, we could kind of tell them what the things are, right? But we could also kind of slow this community conversation down and think about what about your local community that you love. Maybe there's a bakery, right? Maybe there is a specific hike or trail that you would like to walk on. Maybe there is a local theater group, all of those things. And then also what things are missing from your community that you could get involved in, right? So I think it's an interesting opportunity to also not only just educate about local government, but think about local government in terms of where you fit and how you can offer sort of unique or diverse perspectives. Because I think then the information challenges come out naturally, right? So how big of a problem is this? What solutions exist for these problems? And that really, I think, engages people on a much deeper level.
Awesome. And so I think, to an outsider, to someone who's just starting to explore this course or to consider taking the course, a lot of the content around citizenship can feel, so mysterious to us as individuals because, depending on the multiple factors in our lives, there's just so many different ideas of that every individual person might have about what it means to really do, quote unquote, do citizenship, right? So in other words, what does it look like IRL or in real life to practice citizenship, right? And we really believed from the start, at the inception of this class, that we really believed in bringing our participants' knowledge into the classroom because after all, what is citizenship if we aren't collaborating on those ideas? And so to that end, one of the first questions we ask the class is, what do people who self-identify as citizens actually do, right? And participants might list things like being a poll worker or lobbying a lawmaker, these like specific tasks associated with traditionally electoral politics, right? Or they might commonly say maybe more vague things like a citizen looks like they know what they're talking about, or a citizen knows the truth about certain issues. And those things might be ways that your engagement as a citizen can show up. But one of the things that was core for us is that we want to talk about how there are so many different ways it can be laid out, actually. And because this definition is so nebulous to us as a citizenry, we know that all of our students, we knew going in that all of our students were going to have different goals as citizens, like Alana mentioned, right? There's so many different goals you might have as an individual. And they might see citizenship in so many models. And one of them is like this one from Alternative Breaks that you're seeing on the slide here. It tells us that being a citizen just means that community becomes a priority for you and your values and the decisions you make. So you might never in this model work a poll in your entire life, worth a poll in your life or engage much with electoral politics, which is often the only way that folks conceptualize citizenship, right? Sometimes as like having certain documentation, that's not a part of the way that we think of citizenship. But instead, you might seek out opportunities to work outside, alongside community members who have a vision for maybe a greener community, for example. But if you have that vision as a citizen of a greener community, the question becomes, and this is the question we want people to start asking themselves in this class, how do you start realizing that vision? So I'll talk about the text in a second, and that's here on the slide, but the conclusion we kind of came to as instructors is that we had to center this idea of power as a running theme through the course. So we decided that no matter what the participants' goals were, they needed to understand three things about how to do citizenship, how to practice citizenship. And that is, they have to understand where power comes from. They have to understand how power is exercised. And finally, depending on your goal in this moment or in this course, and given the answers to the first two questions, how do I get my community to take the action that I want, right? And the reason for that, and these ideas are parsed out in the text for the class. The reason for that is that Eric Liu, the author of the text, says that power is not inherently good or evil. It just is. It's just there. It's always there, like fire or physics, he says, right? And it determines, though, who gets to determine the rules of the game. And the rules of the game can impact regulation of harmful chemicals being released into our ecosystem. The rules of the game can prevent you from raising chickens in your backyard, which is a very controversial topic up here in Lafayette. It could regulate opening a community garden with the green space you share with your neighbors, right? So in a democracy, a core thing to understand is that we as citizens, we give power. We can give power to our elected officials through elections, for example, but that's just one way that we wield power. And so we like to talk about how we can influence or how we wield power as citizens through social attitudes and assumptions, or through what Mel and I sometimes call people power, the power of gathering together and demonstrating collective interest. And Eric Liu in the text explains how power operates, and we could go on about that, but ultimately we work with the class to talk about what kind of community they want to see and who has the power to create those conditions, right? And the three core things about power that we also want to help folks is that it's not a static concept, it's always flowing, and policy, which is one way that citizens or folks in the class sometimes think about change happening or influence happening. Policy freezes power, right? That's one way to lock power in place. And that power compounds. And so that talk can feel really weird, right? Like talking about power can sometimes feel controversial, especially because of what we know about Hoosiers. And I can go on and on and about that, but I would definitely check out the Indiana Civic Health Index. It was released in 2019. They release them every couple of years. But for us, the first step is really helping the folks in the class really believe that they have a right to engage with power in this way. And also making this conversation about power feel less transgressive, right? And just more like a part of what it means to be a citizen. And so then we can start talking about how you can learn how to shape your unique voice as a citizen before you then talk about how to collaborate with others to reach a civic goal. These are all things that we address, but it all comes from this core of power. So Mel's going to talk a little bit about kind of how we used the course itself to do that.
Great. Before I do that, let's just talk about how it got started, because hopefully you'll be excited to do something like this in the future, and you might wonder, well, how do we start to do something like that? So Alana and I both served on this committee called the Town and Gown Committee at the university, and it was a committee of people at the university and people in the community that were specifically interested in building connections between what we usually call the town, the community, and the gown, the university, which I say the gown is in the town. We are all the community, but that's not what how a lot of people feel. And so this town, which met very early for breakfast at 7 a.m., in a place on campus called Sagamore Dining, where they serve this pretty waffle that you're getting a chance to look at today, which is one of the best parts of the meeting. We would get together to talk about and execute strategies to connect campus to community. And at the time, Alana was also running for county council. And she went on to win county council and was a county councilor through our course, which was a big asset to the work that we were doing. She was looking into this concept of a traditional citizens academy where you educate local citizens on local government so that they understand how to navigate it. And I thought that was a great idea, and I always said, well, what if we house it here and we combine university students in a credit-bearing course and the same number of non-university community members for free? We don't make them pay any kind of audit fee or anything. And we have them learn alongside each other and learn from each other about the various ways that they engage in the community, right? To try to navigate this live text of community together, and what could really come from that, right? And so that was one of the major elements of our course. And here's the Purdue Library. So this is kind of Alana's home for a while before she left us, and so that she was one of our major partners. Is Purdue Libraries, provided both the course number and funding for our course so that we can feed our participants. And then Civic Engagement Leadership Development, that's Vanessa and I, we helped recruit students to the course, as well as I help recruit community members and resources such as a van. So this is us. This is you see us in a group of 3 here, but here we are as individuals. Vanessa spends a lot of her time in the on-campus student pantry and helping coordinate students with meaningful community service. So one of her core strengths in this team was helping us define agencies for our tours that we did of how things were working together. Alana's right here. This is actually when Alana found out that she won county council. And this be there with her. And of course, she was able to bring a lot of her librarian skills to the table. But her role as a county council person was super helpful in getting folks to respond to our emails, being able to set up meetings with people in elected government. But that's also something that's very interesting. Even if you do have a challenge getting people to connect, that's another thing to learn about our communities. Why is it hard sometimes to keep people to respond to those emails when, in fact, that's part of their role is to serve their community? And then myself is down there in the purple shirt, and I think that some of the skills that I'm able to bring is a really good analysis around power and to be able to talk about I'm a community organizer in my off-campus work, and as well as both me, Vanessa, and Alana were all very well positioned in other community organizing groups that function outside of and along with local government, so we can bring in our experience as creating change in our communities without elected roles to help people to understand that you don't have to wait until you're in an elected role. And in fact, for Vanessa and I, you don't have to be in an elected role at all in order to create change.
So
Alana's going to share
Yeah, no. So here's a little bit of like the nuts and bolts of this class. So it was a 1-credit course for the students, and then the 10 community members we did everything in such a way so that they didn't have to have access to course materials on something like Blackboard. So we kind of kept everything on kind of Google Docs, so they weren't enrolled in the class in the same way. In terms of when we ran this class, we ran this as a 5:30 to 8:30 in the evening course on Mondays for 7 Mondays in a row. And the reason why we did this was quite intentional. One was we wanted to give people a meal because we thought that that would really add to the community feeling of the course. And then additionally, we wanted to do that at that time because it made some of our field trips really easy. So we chose a time specifically when the city council met, so that one of the days of the class, we actually went to the city council meeting and kind of observed and then debriefed. So that's how we did it. So 7 Mondays in a row around an October period of last year's when we ran this last. Here are sort of our learning objectives. The first is to articulate a personal definition of citizenship and build connections between citizenry and government on a local level. All right, so this is specifically looking at what does a citizen mean to you, right? Develop insight into multiple approaches to change on a local level. Evaluate your own professional and personal development and by identifying talents, values, strengths, and abilities. So we use the Strength Finder in our course, but you could also look at various other ways of looking at what your own, who you are and how that might change the ways you do things in different ways. And then also explore ways of knowing outside of formal classroom discussion, right? And problemize the idea of college graduates as the single or knowledge holders that exist, right? So this is looking at specifically having the students be seen as knowledge holders, right? But also a lot of the community members in our class were also interested in getting engaged and kind of learning from each other, right? So what are some of the things that we did? Some of the things we did were we often didn't have the class in a classroom, right? So one of the days we went and we observed City Hall, right? So before the meeting, we discussed what was on the agenda. We figured out how to break down a city council agenda, right? Then we went to the meeting and then we debriefed afterwards as well, right? So then we also had a group of kind of optional field trips, and we gave people different options, and this was the ones that they were most interested in. Some of our students, which are pictured here, went on a tour of the county jail. So this is something, you know, obviously when we think about local government, that also includes our criminal system, right? We also went on a tour of a local faith-based nonprofit, specifically. And then also this nightlife locations was an interest. So this was various different things around town who offered things like theater, some places that did additional types of different kind of venues for kind of nightlife. This was a big deal in Lafayette, Greater Lafayette, while the class was going on. So we also brought in speakers and had guests for different classes as well. So what I'm going to go is a couple of different activities that I think can be useful for librarians if you don't have 7 Mondays in a row, right? So we're going to go through a couple of different activities that can be useful as maybe a program in a public library. So this one, which is actually what the picture of, is an activity called What's Your District? And it's a very simple activity in many ways. You have people look up their different districts. So what city council district am I in? What county council district am I in? What school board district am I in? Right? And basically you just, you have people get into groups and then you sort of call out different types and they find other people in the class who are in their same district for that different thing. So maybe in one situation, me and Mel are in the same district, right? So for example, we might be in the same legislative district, right? But then we find out that when we talk about school board, we're actually in different districts. And this is really useful for understanding like how things are organized, because political geography is something that is always really confusing to people. And I think starts that sort of thinking of, oh, it's not just that it's this street and this street, which is not what we think. It's me and Vanessa are together on this issue, and then we need to lobby separately for this other one, right? And we do that as a kind of physical activity. as well. Next, I'll show you the thing for Local Government 101, which is sort of looking at different levels of government. Elected official speed dating, I'll speak about it in just a second. Mapping your community is an activity where for a 2-week period, we had the students on the sort of paper printout of a Google map pay attention to where they went. Like, did you go to the Target? Did you go to the library? Did you go, where were your places that you sort of went to, right? And so we partnered up students with community members, right? And then we had them get together on a single board, which was actually on a bus map, and look at where they went, the community members went versus the students. And that was really interesting because you got an idea for sort of how our physical lives affect our political lives, right? So the students, some students might get all over the community, right? But they might only get around to certain parts of West Lafayette, right? And community members might realize that they actually overlap in some spaces, but not in others, right? So this is kind of the concept of bodying, right? So where you go and how that affects your community, right? And then the class kind of culminated in the completion of a capstone project. So some examples of capstones where they could choose an advocacy, education, or direct action. So as an example of an advocacy thing is giving a public comment at a city council meeting on a topic that's important to them. So some of those might be, one of our students was very passionate about the arts. So she gave a public comment about how important the arts are. Education was specifically educating someone else. So for example, one of our community members was in charge of a local mental health clinic. So she trained her staff in a what do you call it, a staff meeting environment about the things she had learned about local government because she felt it helped them do their work better, right? Also, we had direct action, so getting involved on a particular topic. So a great example of that is one of our students worked on. The city limits of West Lafayette have what are called bubbles, so things that are not annexed inside the city, and she lived in one of these areas. So this was during a city council election year, and she found that she couldn't vote in any city council elections. So she was working on figuring out who to talk to get this area annexed so that she could have more voice in local government decisions, right? So this is a lot of organizing her apartment building, which was the land that was not included, that was the bubble, right, in this case. So this was an activity which is Local Government 101, and the idea of this is to think a little bit about the 3 different branches of government, right? So most people know those areas, so the judicial, the legislative, and the executive, right? And think about the different levels. So at a national level, we know these, right? The executive, head of the executive branch is the president, right? We know that the legislative is Congress, etc. But we don't really think about bringing that down to different levels. And so you have students kind of start at the top and then sort of think down, right? So most people know, the president. They might know that the governor is the chief executive, right, of the state. But then they might not know the county and the city. And that makes sense because in different states you have different local government, right? Local government is not actually mentioned at all in the Constitution, right? And many classes don't cover that because it's so different in different states. So I find this helpful because it's hard to think about what a county commissioner is unless you think about it as, oh, it's the executive branch of the county government. It's hard to think about exactly what a city council does, except that you think, oh, it's the legislative branch of the city government, right? So that helps you sort of internalize where it exists into a framework that the students and community members might already have, right? That helps people because I think when we get down to the city, the county, and the school board level, people often don't feel like they have the tools, right? They feel like it's not meant for them, right? And I think this helps them feel more included and more like they have some of the knowledge already. Then we take some of that information, so we look a little bit at where people get their money and what they work on, right? And then we look at a couple of different examples. So these are actually all things that had come up while I was running for office. So I had heard kind of different issues that people had. So people interested in things like marijuana legalization, people inspired by, we have an amateur astronomer who's interested in light pollution, and we talk about which branch of local government you would talk to in different areas, and that sort of helps people understand connecting that topic, so that thing they're passionate about, with what elements of local government or state that they might consider sort of organizing with or talking to, right? Because you don't need to know everything about every part of local government, just the parts that are really doing the work that you really passionately care about, right? Finally, I think this is a really great out-of-the-box process, and I think you could do this really well on Zoom. So we had an elected officials day in which we invited a bunch of different, actually elected and appointed officials, and we had them kind of sit in all different parts of the room, and every 7 minutes, the students and community members would switch spots. And so you talk to a bunch of different people about what, and it was mostly what do you do, how you know, does that, you know, affect it? What kind of issues are you looking at? Here's what I'm interested in doing on my capstone. Can you help me with that? And we tried to get a real mix of people, and our goal in this was to try as much as possible to get people who by themselves are power makers. So not necessarily a member of city council, but on the bottom person that in the sweatshirt is the county assessor, right? So the county assessor affects, you know, how you assess properties and therefore how much property tax people pay, right? So getting an idea of what an assessor does. The gentleman in the suit is the county attorney, right? Affects a lot of those different things. We had a judge. The lady kind of in the purple hair is a person who runs our local arts initiatives in Greater Lafayette, right? And so you had like a mix of different folks, and it was one-to-one, right? So, so you had a lot more kind of just interactions between them, right? And so it was oftentimes okay as well if the students didn't necessarily always understand everything about it, about that particular issue, but it allowed them to sort of understand that these people are kind of continual people. And they got, our people in the class got all the emails afterwards and actually did often follow up after this event on their particular issues and how they were affected. So that's kind of an example of an activity that I think you could really do in a public library. So you invite a bunch of elected officials, you sort of incentivize them in different ways. I think you could do this really well in sort of a Zoom breakout room. You don't have to do this necessarily during an election, right? So you could do it at different times, and these are all people who are already elected, so you can get a mix of different Democrats and Republicans to get kind of a feeling for how people can you know, lobby on those issues. And now Vanessa's going to tell us a little bit about some of the things that our students did since taking our class.
So yeah, I'm gonna roll through this one pretty quick so we can get to questions. And I say that now because I like to give people a couple of seconds to kind of brew on that. Like, no, you know, it's almost time for us to come up with questions. So be brewing on it. But I'm going to talk a little bit about just a couple of the folks that took our class. So I'll start with Shannon King in the top left corner. And so District 3 is one area where folks on the West Lafayette campus. So this would be a little bit confusing because we have students from we had participants from Lafayette and West Lafayette. Many of our students, not all of our students, found themselves in District 3 where they could vote for someone who would sit on city council. And so running for that position as a sophomore was Shannon King, who also took who also took our Citizens Academy course. And so that was really phenomenal, getting the opportunity to chat with and work with and collaborate with a student who was looking to represent and support their fellow students in that way. So a lot of the things, I'm just going to kind of read just a little piece from the article in the upper left-hand corner. But for her, I think a lot of the barriers that she was facing were something that we were able to pay attention to in the course. So just for example, the fact that there are social barriers or or at least being able to discuss what are the social barriers that there are for young people running for office, right? Let alone folks of color or women running for office, right? And so one of the things that she says that I think is so apt for the course is she talks about how it's really okay to not know what you're doing most of the time. So this idea of being this like expert person on the inside of local politics, right? That's something that we wanted to dispel really quickly in the class, and so it's like so awesome that she's getting to say this in this piece. So it's okay to not know what you're doing most of the time, because for me there was a lot I had to learn as I went along. I would say try your best to be empowered by other people, talk to people, understand how you react around certain people. Ask yourself the questions: how do people see me? What did I learn from that conversation? Be aware of your audience and the people you're representing. It guides you to become the best politician or leader you can be. You can find people who really keep you grounded. And so some of those statements I think were really exciting for us as instructors of the course, hearing her say, don't wait until you have some sort of expert power, or you feel like you have the right expert power to get involved as a politician or as a citizen, right? So a lot of really great things that echo from that course that were kind of showing up there. And like Mel said in the chat, I'll go ahead and raise that up. District 3 is mostly made up of the residence halls ever since Purdue was annexed as a part of West Lafayette. And so the city council rep is always a student because of how the lines are drawn. So Shannon's the second city council person in District 3. So it hasn't been long, but it's still really exciting. So I'll move on to some of the other students. So Emily Jones at the bottom, we're kind of moving counterclockwise. Emily in the bottom, she's holding an ID card. And that's really important for a lot of reasons. So Emily was involved in a lot while she was still at Purdue. She's graduated since she took the course, but a couple of the things that she stayed engaged with was Purdue Votes. As a part of that, there was some really interesting work on campus when the Tippecanoe County clerk was taking issue with the process that verified students' PUIDs or their student IDs, whatever you might call it, or whatever you might have called it at your undergrad, or whatever you know it to be. So that's their student ID that's issued as a part of their time as a student. That for a long time did not have expiration dates on it, and so there was a big fight on campus on the part of the students to make sure that they would still be able to vote without paying an extra $10 that after that issue popped up became a requirement for you to get an ID that reflected an expiration date. And so for many students that was a prohibitive cost, right? And so Emily was really vocal about the ways in which that might create barriers for students, and so that was really powerful. It was just one of many things that she was engaged with, in addition to, as Alana alluded to earlier in the presentation, some of her work with the bubble. So that's just a set of apartments off campus that had this like, maybe it was just 2 apartments, but we call it the bubble because of their inability to be represented in some ways. And so so that was some of her work, and then I'll move on to, and I have a minute, so I'll move on to the folks in the top right-hand corner who run Second Flight Books. And so that is a local bookstore, has been for some time, and they recently up and moved. And so that was during a pandemic, which is really intense. But a lot of the things that they've been really concerned with now that they have this opportunity to sort of fresh start, if you will, is really thinking, how do they immerse themselves more meaningfully into this community? And so I think in part because of the work that they did in Citizens Academy, part of their work in the course, some of that engagement is like they spend a lot more time engaging with their clients and with the public on the way in which they run their business or on the way in which they show up in this community. So for example, this is like one small thing that's just coming to the top of my head, but their outside decor has a couple of like books on the outside. They're like kind of drawn. And they got polls from the community to say what titles did they want to put on display outside as a way to represent more accurately the folks that are in the community. What are the things that people actually want to see, right? So they were really invested in ideas of democracy while in the course, and so this is like one way, large and small, ways large and small, to engage the public in some of their work around literacy. So that's just a small sampling of some of our students. They all did really great projects as a part of their work, and we can talk more about those. That could be kind of the source of some of your questions as well. But for now, I'll just kind of open it up to whatever questions that y'all have.
Okay, so while everyone is kind of thinking those through and typing them out, I want to thank Ilana, Mel, and Vanessa. Okay, I see some typing. And why don't, since we had it in the chat, as others are typing, why don't we address the question Janine had about students voting at Purdue rather than their hometowns?
Yeah, I can totally take that on. I am the staff person at Purdue in charge of the Purdue Votes Coalition that Emily Jones was the student director of. So in the state of Indiana, college students have a choice. They can, no matter where their hometown is, as long as they're 18 on election day and a U.S. citizen, they can choose to register and vote either where they call their hometown, like where their parents live or where they grew up, or they can choose to register and vote where they go to school. They just can't register and vote at both places. The reason why the ID situation was important in this case is because if you do vote in Indiana, you have to have, we have a voter ID law. So you have to show an acceptable form of ID. And for many years, the election board was accepting a Purdue ID as an acceptable form of photo ID. And then a couple of years ago, they decided that they were no longer, we got a new clerk and they interpreted the law differently. They were no longer going to accept it without an expiration date. So that led Purdue to have to make a decision. Are they going to pay to change everybody's IDs out or not? And so Emily was really big on really putting pressure on Purdue to come out with an ID with an expiration date so students can exercise their right to vote here if they choose to do that. And then also to help with the fee relief for the replacement cost. So it's kind of, and I'll say this really quickly, like if you live in Illinois, for example, and you come to Indiana for school and you want to register and vote here, you can register here, but to vote, if you don't have a U.S. passport or an Indiana driver's license, your Illinois driver's license won't work. So that's why that Purdue ID with expiration date is like, we call it the vote ready ID. It's like so valuable for folks to have.
All right, thanks. And Judy types in addition to Zoom meetings, what other COVID changes would you all recommend to follow some of your class activities?
I can take that one. I think a big one, which I didn't really talk about, because it actually got snowed out when we did it in class, is a tour of local art installations. In Lafayette, we have what's called Wabash Walls, and I think that could work just as well as sort of a socially distant activity or a solo activity. We actually had one of our Citizens Academy members actually take a student on a tour of Wabash Walls as an art installation. So I think you could do that socially distant. I think if you have a group of students, you could definitely do this as sort of like choose your own adventure a little bit more. I also think that you could also invite people to courses digitally or virtually. And I think that those could be really great because then you can also bring people in that maybe aren't necessarily always available to drive over and pay for parking or park in a specific area. So I think those are a couple of different things, but I'll pause here and see if my co-presenters have any other ideas.
Right.
Yeah, one of the things that I would say, yeah, outdoor things are really helpful. And then I think just like from my perspective, like engaging folks in, I don't know if a content analysis is the right way, but looking at how media covers local community members when they're taking action. So that could be community members taking action to create a safe space for animals to relax, community members taking action in the streets in a protest against police brutality, or community members taking action for an after-school arts program or something like that. Maybe looking at how the media talks about community members taking action and what the differences might be and why people think that is. So I think that's one way that is a good socially distanced way of getting people to read their community as a live text.
And we're getting a lot of good comments in the chat. While people are typing, and if you have any other questions, go ahead and type those in. I'll just take now to quickly highlight, for those of you public librarians or others who need an LEU certificate, it is in the upper left, or sorry, the upper center of the screen. Go ahead and click on the file and then click the download button. And then at the very bottom in the center are all of our contact information, myself and the 3 presenters. Let's see.
It looks like we have a question, if you could see this at a community college or a public library. Yes, I definitely could see those as both. And actually, so I did a similar class called Greater Lafayette Greater before I worked with Mel and Vanessa. And I did a version of Greater Lafayette Greater, which is on very similar points, just mostly for a student audience. And I did a program on it for the local Tippecanoe County Public Library. So that was focused on, the prompt in that class is, if you had $4 million to spend on the community, what would you do and why? And so we talked about those different things in class, and it worked really well as a program for that area. I think community colleges would be really interesting because I think that most community college students are non-traditional students, in my assessment maybe. And I think that they would be really super interesting to have those sorts of communities get together, because I think that you'd have a lot of different age ranges and generational things, which I think that was one of the great things of having community members in this class is you really had some different ages working together on different topics. And I thought that that was really interesting and engaging. And I will say that the people that took this class were always very respectful and interested. Particularly the community members were really interested in what the students had to say, and vice versa, right? So I could see this working in many different ways. I think in the community college environment, you'd have to figure out what it counts for in their learning, and I think this could be kind of a kind of composition class or other things. So where it kind of fits in the program. Oh, it's a joint use. Oh, yeah, I think that would be a perfect environment to run something like this if it's a joint. So, yeah, if it was a community college / public library, oh, that would be a really interesting place to run something like this, because I think you'd have these naturally as well.
Sure. And I don't know which Tippecanoe location, but at least when I lived up there, the East Side branch was at the Ivy Tech. So you actually kind of lived it.
Yeah, and I think since then Tippecanoe has taken over that branch, so it's not co-owned by Ivy Tech, but it would still be a great location for an event like that, for sure. Yeah.
Nick says we have to have high school seniors as well as community college students. Yeah. Great comments,
Yeah.
guys.
On to Nick's question in the chat. Hello, my friend Nick Shinkle. I'm glad to see your name here. I think that it is. I think that it is so important to get people to connect with their local officials when their local officials are not running for something, and when the citizen is not specifically asking for something. So I think that this time. This like that sweet spot of really connecting where folks can ask like good questions about what do you do? What do you want people to know about what you do? What do you wish you heard more from related to your constituents? I think is really good because building those relationships then will help people to leverage that time later when they are asking something or they're lobbying their elected officials, right? Because it was a municipal election year when we did this course. So we intentionally did not invite people for the meet and greet that were up for reelection, except we did invite the mayor. So that was like important to us to make sure that people were meeting, our students were meeting elected officials when the elected officials weren't trying to like politic them. And then I think on the other side, if you were meeting your elected official for the first time when you're trying to lobby them, of course, they're going to come at it maybe from a place of defensiveness. So that sweet spot is a really good time to build those relationships.
Yeah, and I want to echo that point and call out a webinar that was just done at the State Library last month from one of our legal counsels that apparently places that receive federal funds, so like libraries, can sometimes have Hatch Act implications. So doing it either completely balanced or with officials who are not running, I think is the safest way to, to conduct it. And if anyone wants a link to that webinar, just let me know. My email is on the screen here and I can get that to you.
And I would, some kind of elected officials that don't get invited to stuff like this are judges don't often get to talk about what judges do. That's a great one. We invited the surveyor. Surveyors never get invited to these sorts of stuff. So I think that he was pleased as punch to get to talk about surveying. For those that don't know, in Indiana, the only thing that surveyors don't do is surveying. So he was very excited to tell people what he did. Like I said, a county attorney is not an elected official, but affects a lot of different things in a city. I'm trying to think of other people who run like a local homeless shelter are also really helpful people to kind of connect people with, just to give you an idea of kind of people you may have not thought about, but do have kind of like local government implications.
The chat has been really great, guys. I want to thank everyone again. I will be happy to stick around, and I don't want to speak for the presenters, but I'm sure that we can take a few more questions. But as we get close to 11 o'clock, I just want to remind everyone that the LEU can be downloaded in the upper center portion of the screen. All of our contact is on the screen as well. I will be getting the recording out to you all hopefully by the end of next week. And it will go up on the archived webinars webpage of the State Library. So if you need to point your fellow staff members to that or anyone else in the community, that'd be great. Is there any other questions? Please feel free to type them in now.